Okay, folks, this is the fifth video for Module 6. So we just got finished talking about pro-social behaviors and kind of explanations for why we would help other people, right? Smaller. So let's move on and talk about the bystander effect, also sometimes called the bystander intervention effect or bystander non-intervention effect. Okay, so we go back to this awful incident in 1964, where a young woman named Kitty Genovese was walking home from work in New York City, and an assailant attacked her, and over the course of half an hour, killed her. And at the time, the papers reported that 37 or 38, depending on which paper you read, people had witnessed the crime, and none of them had tried to help or called the police. So it's a pretty shocking story, right? Now, the story appears to be wrong in a few details. This idea that 37 or 38 people had witnessed the crime, very few of those witnesses were actually in any position to see what was happening. And at least 2 people actually did call the police. So those details are wrong. Nevertheless, public response prompted social psychologists to do research on how people respond in emergencies. So the big names here are Darley and Latané. They conducted a bunch of really creative studies looking into what they called the bystander effect. They proposed that when more people are available to help in an emergency, it actually becomes less likely that any one person will act. So that might feel counterintuitive, but they're saying, you know, if you're being attacked and there's hundreds of people around, you're actually less safe than if there's maybe 1 or 2 other people around, because the hundreds of people around are less likely to do anything than if there's fewer people witnessing. So let's talk about their research. They did a number of studies where they staged emergencies, and then they varied whether the witness was on their own when the emergency is happening or versus being with other people. So I will give you the smoke-filled room study link so that you can watch this silent footage looking at, how willing would participants be to report that smoke is filling a room, and how long would it take them to say something. So, they have a scenario where a person shows up to be a participant in the study. They're sitting in this room filling out paperwork, right? And from under a nearby door, smoke starts to billow into the room. So they're looking at how long will it take before this person gets up and goes to find some help, right? And to tell somebody in charge that it looks like there's possibly a fire, right? And they varied the scenario whereby either it was the one participant by themselves in this room, or there were a couple of other people there. And the other people, who are Confederates, also would sit there and do nothing, right? So what they found was the number of other people present is the important variable. If the person's alone, most report that something's going on within 4 minutes, and often way before that, right? So that's the dark green line here. We're looking at the percent reporting smoke and time going by in minutes. And you see that if the person's by themselves, very quickly, by let's see, 4 minutes, we're talking about 75% of people have gotten up and said, hey, we need to look at this. Versus the paler green line here, which is where they're part of a 3-person group, where the other 2 people just sit there doing nothing. And in that scenario, the real participant sits there doing nothing for a long, long time, right? So if there are 2 others present, less than half say or do anything, even at the 6-minute mark where it's starting to get really foggy in there. So be sure to watch that footage. It's pretty dramatic. Got to pause for a sec. Okay. So a lot of research looking into this has uncovered 4 major reasons for the bystander effect, which is this tendency to do nothing when there's a crisis. Okay? So someone's lying there in the street and other people are just walking by. Why are they doing that? 4 reasons. Reason number 1, bystanders expect other bystanders to help. right? So the more people around, the less likely any one person is going to be to step forward. It's called a diffusion of responsibility, right? Somebody should do something, everyone is thinking, but nobody's thinking, I should do something, right? Why does it have to be me? There's hundreds of people here, right? So everyone's expecting someone else to do something. Reason number 2, people fear making social blunders in ambiguous situations. So what this means is if you see, for example, you're walking along and you see someone lying there, the first thing that has to happen for you to intervene is you need to decide that it's an emergency. And if it's not clear that it's an emergency, and we don't want to look stupid, we don't want to do the wrong thing, you might be thinking to yourself, well, maybe this guy's just having a nap. Maybe he's a homeless guy and this is where he sleeps. And if I wake him up, I'm doing him no favors. So the first step is to recognize that it's an emergency. And some scenarios are pretty ambiguous and we don't want to look stupid, right? Third reason, people are less likely to help when they're anonymous and can remain so. So if there's a lot of people around, no one individual is going to feel particularly compelled to help in part because nobody's going to know that they were there and did nothing, right? So if you do need help, it's a good idea to point to a specific person if there's a crowd of people around and say something like, you in the red shirt, call the police, because that sort of breaks through that anonymity and it makes people more likely to act. And then reason number 4, people are going to weigh the risks and benefits of getting involved, right? So if you're on your way to work or something or to school and there's somebody lying in the street, part of what's going on in your head is, I got to get somewhere. If I call the police, if I do this or I do that, then I'm going to be late, right? So maybe you're weighing that. And then on the other hand, you're also thinking to yourself, how can I look myself in the mirror at the end of the day and feel like a good person if I just walk past, right? How can I live with myself? So weighing the risks and benefits around intervening and not intervening. Okay. I'm going to move into chapter 13 now, where we get to talk about self and personality. Some really interesting stuff. So how do we answer the question, who am I? How do you develop this sense of who you are? So when we talk about sense of self, or this term, self-concept, we're talking about who we believe we are. So your self-concept is who you believe you are. The term personality refers to a person's typical thoughts, emotions, behaviors, stable across time and circumstances. And it's part of what you mean when you say myself, right? Your personality. But what makes up your self-concept? Right? Who you believe you are. There's your mental representation of your personal experiences. What that boils down to is your memories of your life, right? So episodic memory, right? That's part of who you believe you are. It's all the stuff you've been through, all the stuff you've experienced. There's your physical body. That's part of the self-concept too. There's your awareness of being separate and unique, right? That you are a person separate from other people. There's elements like your age, your gender, all the different roles that you play in life. Those are part of who you believe you are too, like student, son, daughter, parent, employee, friend, spouse, and on it goes. There's your interpersonal style, things like whether you're shy or friendly, reserved, outgoing, funny, serious, right? There's your personal characteristics, like are you moody, optimistic, right? And then the physical traits, which kind of goes along with physical body here. Tall, short, fat, thin, those are components of how you feel about sort of who you are, right? Making up your self-concept. So it includes, self-concept includes this thing called the self-schema, which is an integrated set of your memories about your life, your beliefs, and generalizations about yourself, right? It's a summary of the relevant information to come up with who you are. So if you're like on a first date with someone and you're trying to get to know each other, often the self-schema is activated when you're trying to explain like, well, this is who I am, right? It summarizes who you are. Your immediate sense of self right here and now is called your working self-concept. Just like we have working memory, which is whatever's going on in your mind right now, your sense of who you are right now is your working self-concept. It's the version of you that's relevant in the moment. And so it affects your behavior in different situations, right? So when you're a student sitting in a classroom, your working self-concept will involve all those aspects of you that pertain to being a student, right? Versus when you're at a party with your friends, working self-concept is going to be more around behaviors at parties and, friend group stuff, right? So your sense of self could include fun-loving and intelligent. And at a party, the fun-loving is on center stage. And at, in a classroom, it would be the intelligent part that's center stage, right? So your working sense of self, your working self-concept reflects the environment that you're in, right? There's a lot of different aspects to you, depending on different scenarios. The timer here. Yeah, we're good. So self-esteem, I know is a term people are familiar with. It's how we feel about our self-concept, how we feel about the person we believe we are. So many theories propose that self-esteem is based on how we believe others perceive you, right? A view known as reflected appraisal. So part of self-esteem might involve how you think other people think of you, right? Now, there's a tendency for self-esteem to drop in adolescence, reaching its lowest point between 18 and 22, especially for women. And it makes sense that this is the case because girls and women are bombarded by messaging about how they're supposed to be, right? These unattainable standards that can really do a number on self-esteem. The good news is that it increases from there, peaking in our 60s. And so once you kind of leave all that noise behind about who you're supposed to be and pleasing other people, it gets easier to have higher self-esteem. Studies generally find that women have lower self-esteem than men, although the gap appears to be decreasing, and the decrease is in the direction of men's self-esteem starting to be attacked more, which is not anything anybody wants. It's not that we want men to feel as bad about themselves as women do. We would like, people to feel good about themselves regardless of gender. Okay? But again, are you beach body ready? The perfect body. It is not hard to find examples of, unattainable standards of attractiveness for women. And more we're finding men being targeted the same way, right? And so that would explain why men's self-esteem might be declining too. Some changes in the air, the Dove campaign is using more kind of typical bodies, different body shapes in their advertising campaigns, instead of it all being, 17-year-old, 100-pound people, right? Now, one perspective suggests that if you want to feel better about yourself, and this just makes good sense, right? You should treat yourself as you would treat a good friend. Self-compassion refers to treating yourself with, that word should be curious, acceptance and kindness, right? Like, be your own best friend. Be in your own corner. Like yourself, take care of yourself, accept yourself, be nice to yourself. And research shows this is related to greater life satisfaction and less depression, very, very obviously, right? Try to cultivate a kindness towards yourself. Easy to say, hard to do, especially if you've been confronted for years with messaging that says you're not okay. So a review of hundreds of studies found that people with high self-esteem are happier. So there is a connection between self-esteem and happiness. But self-esteem is only weakly related to other people's opinions of us, which is kind of interesting, right? So our self-esteem influences our perception of how people feel about us. If you've got low self-esteem, you might be assuming other people don't like you. If you've got high self-esteem, you might be assuming that other people do like you, but in fact, your own self-esteem doesn't do a good job of predicting what other people think about you. Okay? And having super high self-esteem doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person either. Violent criminals commonly have very high self-esteem. School bullies have high self-esteem. Okay? So while self-esteem is related to happiness, it's not a great indicator of success in life and in being a good person and in having good social relationships. It's really only weakly related to objective life outcomes, like having sustainable relationships and good careers and things like that. Okay. I think I'm going to pause here and we will pick it up in the next one.